Hey, welcome to Walking with Jesus. We're going to talk, and we're in lesson 09 in our series. And wise men come to see Jesus. So we're going to talk a bit about how God draws us to Christ. There's our little timeline. And we're up here, we're just getting up here at the top now. We're kind of moving down a little bit. It started somewhere first year of life. So we've actually moved down the timeline chart a little bit. So how far would you travel to see a grandchild? Or a nephew or a niece? Maybe one of your children is going to have a baby. Would you drive? How long would you take to get there?
I drove all the way from Washington State down here to be with my daughter while she had a baby.
Well, okay. And it took you how many days to get here?
3 days.
3-day driving. All right. Well, that's pretty commendable. How far would you travel to see some celebrity? Or some public figure, or some presidential inauguration? Have any of you ever driven to Washington, D.C. to be there for an inauguration?
No.
I'm a Navy brat.
No, I'm an Army brat.
We had a friend in California that was a fan of Michelle Kwan.
Who's that?
And Michelle Kwan, ice skater,
Oh, okay.
Olympic ice skater.
Oh, now I know who she is. Okay.
And this person would go sometimes to some considerable effort to get to a Michelle Kwan event, especially if it was in that area in Southern California, to just watch her skate. And we've got a friend out here that is a very avid friend of Donny Osmond. And so at least once a year she flies to Las Vegas for his show and gets her picture taken with him. And her husband's okay with this. Their marriage is sound, but it seems like the expense and the effort some people will go to be around. Now, we've got some friends here that are Boston Red Sox baseball fans. And not only do they go to almost all of their games that are local, they go down to their spring training every spring and rent a condo down there. And they are there for their entire spring training. So, some people do things like that. We're going to take another twist here. Have you ever had to flee for your life or for the safety of your family? You may know of someone, haven't been there yourself, but you may know somebody who left Vietnam or Cambodia and came up to the United States with nothing. Or we hear every once in a while people coming over from Cuba. They escape the situation there. And if they can make it to shore without getting turned around by the Coast Guard, they get to stay. And people are fleeing that oppression that still exists there. So we're going to talk about some things like that as we're going through Walking with Jesus tonight. How does God draw us to His Son? So first of all, I want to say that wise men still seek Jesus. And we've got the little signs you can put in your yard. If you don't have one already, you want to get one, church has them. They're available for you. And you can put that in your yard. Wise men still seek Him. Very good for Christmas time. Scientific research confirms that Herod the Great died around 4 BC. Now, Jesus is already born before Herod the Great dies. And the wise men visit the baby before Herod dies. So this places the birth of Jesus actually about 4 or 5 BC. So instead of this being 2015, this is more like 2019 or 2020 from the birth of Christ. It's kind of like by the time they discovered that they'd made the error in the dating method, so much of the world had accepted what it was, they just kind of left it alone. Nobody's really bothered to correct the calendars in that little regard. So we still, regardless of that, we still see God's hand in the life and attraction of His Son. we're in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 18. And Jesus has some visitors from very far away who want to worship him as King of the Jews. So, how does God draw us to Christ? Well, he starts by reaching us where we are. In Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." So Magi, which means a sorcerer or astrologer, have come from the east. Now, we tend to think negative of astrologers, and maybe rightly so. We'll talk about that maybe some another time, but we don't know exactly how many there were. We do not know exactly where they were from. We just know that they were evidently east of Israel, and the sorcerer or astrologer means that they saw signs in whatever literature it was or whatever sources they consulted that had confirmed to them that a king had been born to the Jews. Martha?
So why do they say there were 3 wise men?
3 gifts.
3 gifts. So there was 3 wise men because there were 3 gifts.
That's what they assumed. It could have been 2 wise men that brought 3 gifts. Could have been a dozen wise men that happened to bring 3
It
gifts.
doesn't actually say.
It doesn't. The Bible doesn't really make that clear exactly how many there were. Now, Mesopotamia is about 300 to 500 miles from Judea, depending on whether you're on the east side or the west side. And if they were average 25 miles per day on camel or horse, or even walking, you can, if you're in good general health, my dad took a Boy Scout troop on a 50-mile hike back when he was in Scouts. And those kids had some energy, and they walked 25 miles a day. They finished that hike. They're going to plan it for 3 days, but they actually finished it in 2 days. So we know a person can walk 25 miles in a small group. So it would take them 12 to 25 days to travel from the Mesopotamia area to Jerusalem. So the question they asked was who had been born King of the Jews, not who will be born. So their understanding is that the Messiah, the King of the Jews, has already been born. So how far and how long would you be willing to travel to see a stranger's baby or a celebrity's child? Some of you like to read the celebrity gossip magazines, and you get all this stuff about what they're doing. Some of you follow the celebrity. That's okay, I guess. Except for I notice that most of those magazines, all they tell you about is the garbage in their lives. They don't tell you about the good things. They just tell you about the trash. It seems like if they can trash somebody that's a celebrity and famous, maybe you won't feel so bad about being trashed yourself. I think I'd rather focus on the love of Jesus, in my opinion, but not everybody agrees with my opinion, so they're wrong. Well, Joseph and Mary are unknown, ordinary people. We've talked about that before. How many people in Bethlehem and Jerusalem did not even know about the birth of the Messiah? And yet these astrologers, these wise men, come hundreds of miles from the east to worship him. God took them from where they were and brought them to where he wanted them. Will you allow him to do that with you? Now, we might travel from one corner of the nation to the other to see a grandchild and help out. Some of us would fly instead of drive. That was quite a trip, I'm sure. Driving, how many hours a day did you drive?
Only 8 hours a day because I can't drive more. I came down with a friend.
Okay.
And kind of split up the driving during the day. But being that we were the age we were, or was, we only did 8 hours.
You stopped at 8 hours. You got made across in basically 24 hours.
Yeah.
That's quite a distance. Quite a trip. Well, here's our little map to help us get a picture of this. Here is the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. The Garden of Eden was probably down in this area down here somewhere. This area is generally Mesopotamia, and so they would have come somewhere in here. Again, were they on the east side or the west side, we do not know. But they followed the route. Now, they could go across the desert here, but that is pretty dry and pretty barren. It would shorten their trip by maybe 100 miles or so, or more. But it's more logical to follow the route up the north. The trade route was up this way. Anybody doing trade could come up here where it's more food and habitable, more populated, and they could resupply as they're going, and they would come down then through into Israel and into Jerusalem. So that's probably the route that they took. So, God draws us to Christ through Scripture. Matthew chapter 2, verses 3 through 6. Now, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and we're going to find out that was an understatement in just a minute, and all of Jerusalem with him. Because when King Herod was disturbed, all of Jerusalem had good reason to be disturbed. He was just, we'll talk about that in a minute. He had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law. He'd asked them where the Christ was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. So they are looking for the king, the one who is to be born, the next king of the Jews. They see a star, but there's no indication about where the star is in the sky. We saw his star in the east. Was that while we were in the east? Did it appear there? Did it appear west of them, saying, go this way to Israel? Or did it appear just in the sky? You know how stars move as the earth rotates. And so did they see the star over here and watch it rotate over this way as the night was going away? That would be somewhat logical. But there's no indication where they saw it. We assume that it was before them as they traveled, which would mean that the star would be just kind of hanging in there all day and all night long. Now, we don't see stars during the day. Maybe if you've got a really, really good, powerful telescope, I haven't tried that out yet, you might be able to get past the Earth's atmosphere, the sunlight, and all that stuff, and get out some brighter stars. But generally, we wait till night to see that, where the sun's not interfering with our vision. They will again see the star on their approach to Bethlehem, and it will appear, evidently, over Joseph and Mary and baby Jesus' residence. Now again, how do you look up and say, let's see now, that star's over that house right there, when you're about 100 yards away? Yeah, that looks right to me. You know, you look at the end of the rainbow, and they said that the Irish will say there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Yeah. And so you scatter over there, trying to get to the end of the rainbow. Have you ever found it? You notice it keeps moving, and you haven't found the pot of gold either, so much for that. So they're looking for the one born king of the Jews. They naturally go to Jerusalem to inquire of Herod under the impression that it might be Herod's child. That's a loud stereo, isn't it? So, now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Herod is disturbed. That's a very understatement. Herod is extremely jealous of anyone who threatens his throne. He is so jealous that he has some of his own children killed. In fact, he had one or more of his wives. He had more than one wife. He had one or more of his wives killed because he thought that they posed a threat to his reign on the throne. And he is such a terrible leader. And if there's trouble in Jerusalem, he just soon kill you just to look at you. So if Herod is disturbed, you are disturbed. Because you don't know what he's going to just take it out on all of you. You don't know what he's going to do. He is insane, for lack of a better explanation. but he kind of keeps his head about him just enough to inquire of the local religious leaders about where this king is to be born, and he informs the wise men. Now, this is a ruse waiting, of wanting to know so he can worship the child. He's going to worship the child with a sword in his hand, as we will see in a minute. So, but God drew the wise men, and Herod consulted the scriptures to tell the wise men where to go to find the Christ child. So God draws us to Christ through others. In Matthew chapter 2, verses 7 through 9. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. Now again, I'm going to take just a little sidebar to say the star appeared when Jesus was born. If you watch the movie The Nativity Story, they have the star appearing before Jesus is born, and the wise men arrived the night that he is born. But I think we're going to see here in just a minute that that's not the case. Herod sent them to Bethlehem, and he said, "Go and make careful search for the child, and as soon as you find him, report it to me, so that I too may go and worship him." Now, I'm not going to go down there and wander all over this little town. It's not a big, it's not like Lakeland, where you'd be wandering all over town. Hey, where was the Messiah born? It's a much smaller community. I don't know what the population is today. Maybe just a few hundred people back in Jesus' day. Of course, it would be swollen for the census until the census is over, and then the people go back home. So there might be a few extra residents there for that. So he wants to worship the king. And so after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. Question I made a minute ago. How could they tell? So there's the house right there. Let's go in and see this child. Well, the wise men consulted Herod. Herod consulted the local religious leaders. You know, God used a hated ruler and some religious leaders who are later going to hate Jesus and want him murdered to direct the wise men to the right place to see the Christ child that had recently been born. It is a wise man who knows that he needs others in order to accomplish his task in life. I could not be where I am today teaching you about the life and teachings of Jesus if it weren't for other people in my life in various times and various places, and some even right today, that are doing things that I don't have the time or the skill or the know-how to do. Well, a webmaster. I tried building a website. It didn't work too well. Fortunately, I've got a webmaster. He's built me a nice site. It needs to be redone so that it can be compatible with tablets and these smartphones and all these devices. But I count on somebody else's skills in these areas to help out. I tried publishing my own books. Martha, you saw what some of them look like. And we won't go any further with that, except for when I ran out of toner, they just didn't look so good. And I'm trying to sell these for a price. Now I've got a publisher that's got the equipment, the skill, and the know-how. They're going to come out beautiful. The pages won't have smears or streaks on them. You won't have any color mismatch on the photographs that are in the books. You'll get to see the beautiful lessons. So, God draws this to use the hated ruler and some religious leaders to bring out the Christ child. And so God can use, you can go all through the Old Testament. How many times God used non-Jews to do his message through the Jewish people. So a wise man knows that he needs help in some of those tasks to accomplish his life. Now, God draws us to Christ through personal encounter. Matthew chapter 2, verse 10 through 12. When the wise men saw the star, they were overjoyed. And on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. And they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So the star reappears. Did it go away? Or were the wise men simply not looking for it while they were on their way to Jerusalem? They know King of the Jews. Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish people. We go to Jerusalem to see where the King of the Jews, this baby, has been born. And if they're traveling during the day, they're not going to see the star that appears only at night. Now they may see the sundown. Okay, the star's still there, but they're not trying to travel in the dark. They didn't have flashlights and modern highways and streets with lights along the way to help light the things up. It's dark out there. And there are some people that do bad things after dark out there. And even though there may have been they may have had a caravan of support people with them, they may have just been 2 or 3 guys, or 4 or 5, all by themselves. We presume that they had camels. Notice how many nativity scenes show them. The Bible doesn't say. But they travel the distance. The dark presence of the star during this journey, which is about 6 miles, is being made after dark. So they left Jerusalem late in the day. 6 miles, let's see, if we walk a good pace, I could, and if I really was in a big hurry, I could do 2 miles in 30 minutes or less. Most people don't walk all that fast. So 2, 4, 6, you're talking an hour and a half minimum to walk from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And that's on flat and level ground, not worrying about uphill, downhill. You're going to go slower uphill, and you're not going to go that much faster downhill. So let's say 2 hours minimum to walk. And so the sun is set. It's late in the day. The sun is set. They want to get to Bethlehem to see the star appearing over the house. And somewhere after the sun is down on Joseph and Mary's door. Upon the arrival to Bethlehem, they find Joseph and Mary without any directions from local residents. Again, how could they tell that the star is appearing over this particular house? This one looks right, and it's not that house. Amazes me. Unless maybe God did like we do in all the nativity stories, we get a spotlight shining right down to
God did it.
The star. God did it. We know that. You know, it's going to be exciting. It's going to be exciting to get to heaven. And maybe God will play the whole video for us from Adam and Eve. We get to see what they really look like before they got all messed up. And Cain and Abel and all the people all the way down through history. We get to see what Abram and Sarah looked like when they had their baby, and all the other prophets, and Jesus. We get to see Joseph and Mary and how young they were, and what Jesus looked like when he was born. Somebody just recently, it was on the internet, took a picture. They took an artist depiction from the Shroud of Turin to say this is what they think Jesus looked like when he was crucified. Mm-hmm. And they were able, basically, I guess, with the eyes and the mouth in proportion, they took kind of like this, and they extrapolated from that picture and those proportions, and they went backwards to try to see if they could show what Jesus looked like when he was 12 years old. Quite interesting. How can they? Now, when we get to heaven, we're going to know what Jesus looked like when he was 12 years old. There won't be any worry about that.
Well, they're going to show him at different stages there?
I don't know. I just think that in heaven we will know all that God knows, and we'll be able to see all of Earth's history from beginning to end, even the things that happen after we die, if the Earth doesn't just self-destruct before we die.
I don't think we're going to see them. I think we're going to see them how they were.
We'll have to figure it out when we get there. You know, we're assuming things, and you're right. We may only see them as they were. We may see them. We may get to see our whole history played out. All those wonderful childhood memories. And maybe even the bad ones that you survived. Anyhow, the wise men introduce themselves. They see the baby. They present gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, gold. Gold denotes royalty, a king, the mental kinship, the symbol of Jesus' power and wealth. And if you think about it, Jesus has all the power, and even though you think you own what you own, Jesus really owns it all.
That's right.
He owns everything, including the stuff the devil thinks he owns. Some people are using it for good, some people aren't. But in the ultimate end, they're going to find out that Jesus owns it all. Frankincense. Frankincense reflects the divinity. Jesus as a priest, and it talks about his spiritual kingship. A fragrance to God is an act of worship. Now, burning fragrance was a lot of the Old Testament, the Jewish worship process, especially in the temple. They had the altar of incense, and they kept incense burning there day in, day out. Now, probably frankincense, although we don't know whether they used other fragrances or not. Some people like to burn incense in their house and make it smell the way the incense makes it smell.
Thanks.
Huh? Some people think that's a little too strong. If I was going to burn incense, I'd want it to smell like the woods, like the outdoors. I like the smell of pine and cedar.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a whole different subject. Oh, and then they've got myrrh. Myrrh reflects the humanity. The Jesus is a prophet. The physical kingship. The symbol of Jesus' coming death for your sins and mine. More strangers, more confirmation to Joseph and Mary about their baby, and some wonderful gifts that say a lot about who this child really is. Now, it could be that that gold was very helpful to them when they had to skedaddle out of town and scamper down to Egypt. They didn't have time to pack up a whole lot of anything. We're going to find out here in just a minute. So how are they going to survive? Oh, they've got the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh. Now, whether they sold the frankincense and the myrrh, or whether they just consumed it over the course of time, only God knows. But I'm sure that that gold helped with their expenses for a while. Now, wise men have a personal encounter with God in a dream, and are wise enough not to go back to Herod, but to go home by a different route. God says, don't go back to that guy, he's bad. So their personal encounter with the Son of God draws them to listen to God's commands. Here again, the word they obey. Oh, what a challenge for us to live by, to obey God and His instructions to us in our lives. Well, we got one more, and that is God draws His Son to safety. Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 to 18. When the wise men had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said. Take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up. This implies that they're asleep. It's the middle of the night. Maybe at midnight, maybe it's 2 or 3 in the morning, or 4 in the morning. I don't know, but he got up, he took the child and his mother during the night, he left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod, and so was fulfilled what the Lord had said to the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. Again, an understatement. He gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance to the time that he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. Now the map. Here's Jerusalem, 6 miles south. There's Bethlehem, and approximately 200 miles, 25 miles a day, several days they're walking. They don't have a car, they don't have a horse and a cart, they don't have a camel, they just have themselves, and they come down somewhere here into Egypt. Now, did they stay on the east side of the Egypt, or did they cross over in further? Here's the Nile River way over here. Did they go over further into the central part or the west side of Egypt? We don't know. Maybe they stayed in Egypt in the land of Goshen, where Joseph's family were, and the early Israel, when they were in captivity in Egypt. We don't know. But that's about approximately the route that they would probably have taken the route down through here. Now, just a little footnote here. We're going to see a picture of Masada right in a moment, and Masada is about right in here. Not likely that they would have come down to the Dead Sea, along the Dead Sea, and then cut across there. There is some slight possibility they might have cut over towards the Mediterranean Sea and down through Gaza into Egypt. That is a possibility too. But we don't know. But either way, they got out of town. They got out of town fast. Here's Masada. This up here was the part where Herod built most of his fortress. The whole area, the top of this mountain, was set up so people could live up there. And after Herod had died, they went kind of dormant for a while. And then the Jews that escaped Jerusalem, a lot of them went to Masada. And of course, you know the story how the Romans came, surrounded the place with encampments. You can't see them in this photo, but they're squares at various places around there where the Roman armies camped. And they built a siege work on the other side, and built a ramp, and took a battering ram up that ramp.
Whoa.
And before they could break in, the Jews decided we'd rather kill each other and die than let the Romans kill us. Now you can walk up to the top. You see this little path right here. You can walk that path up to the top, and it goes over here, and it comes up, ends up about right here. Or you can do what Sylvia and I did, and take the cable car. A whole lot faster and easier. I think that's the cable car right there. I'm not sure. And up to the top. We walked around there while we were there. But again, this is what the wilderness looks like south of Jerusalem. The Joseph and Mary are somewhere in that region, probably west of there, headed towards Egypt.
You know, in the Smithsonian Channel, they did a special on Masada, and they also made a made-for-TV movie on Masada. I didn't see that. They have one with Peter O'Toole, and that
I'm sure that
was bad.
That story been told. It was bad.
No, I'm talking about the movie was bad.
Oh, the movie was bad.
I wanted to see the one that Channel 7 put on. CBS put on. Because it's, and you know, in Josephus, what's his name?
Josephus?
Josephus has it written in his history book, the whole thing.
Yeah.
He was there.
Josephus,
he was there.
He was living in that time, and somehow managed to escape being killed, and was able, of course, to write the story for history. And he's one of the prominent historians of that era. So
yes, he is.
God draws His Son to safety almost immediately after the wise men leave. Maybe the same night. They left during the day, or sometime. Well, they probably left a few days earlier, and because it suggests that Herod doesn't realize that he'd been tricked. He didn't know how long the wise men were down in Egypt, or down in Bethlehem. Maybe they stayed a week, and then they go home. And so a month or two later, Herod realizes, those wise men didn't come back to me. I don't know, we're speculating on this, we'll find out when we get to heaven. But he realized that he'd been tricked. Those wise men are not going to come back. They figured out my plan. And so he, again, gets furious. And so he wants to kill the baby king. So Joseph has to flee so that he and Mary and Jesus will be safe. Now, there's no mention about whether they have a donkey to help carry their stuff. Hopefully they did. Maybe all they had was what they could carry on their backs. I mean, gold is pretty heavy. And we do not know how much gold he was given, but that would be pretty heavy, so hopefully they had at least a donkey. But none of the things that you and I would think of if we were going to make that trip today. When we were in Israel, we had a nice SUV to drive around in, and plenty of room to put our luggage and souvenirs and all that other stuff we accumulated while we were there. But here's a very important point. Joseph obeys without any hesitation. So whenever the wise men left, God reveals to Joseph, you better get out of town, not tomorrow afternoon, not tomorrow morning, before sun is up. Right now. So he's got maybe 10, 15 minutes to wake Mary up, get a few of their things together. If they've got the donkey, get the donkey loaded up with the stuff, and head down the road. And away they go. So Joseph obeys without hesitation. When we hear from God, obedience should be our greatest concern. How would you feel if you only had minutes to take everything that you could carry and travel by foot for 155 to 200 miles to a foreign land to protect your baby and maybe you and your wife from a killer? Now, I get a devotion on the internet on this day, and I've read more than one story, and I've heard of missionaries who have gone to mission fields and they've had situations where, like in China during World War II, where they were coming after the Christians. And they were told to flee. And some of them fled and survived. Some of them didn't flee and died. Some of them didn't flee, and somehow God miraculously turned the tide and protected them. So you don't know which one you're going to be in that situation. But that's something that can happen to us here. The church exploded in its growth after the day of Pentecost, because when the Jews started persecuting the Christians, they scattered out to all the other places, and when they went to another place, they started telling people, hey, Jesus of Nazareth was a Messiah, he died on the cross for our sins, and we can be forgiven if we would just believe in him and follow him with our lives, and boom, church starts. And later on the apostles come along and they say, hey, here's the church here, and they strengthen them and encourage them, and away it goes. The gospel exploded across the known world at that time because of that. Because of people escaping the persecution. Well, how long will it be before Herod realizes that the wise men are not coming back? A couple of days? A week? A month?
Who knows?
We don't know. But Joseph and Mary are wise in getting out of town fast. Now, Bethlehem is a relatively small village. Maybe 200-300 people, maybe 1,000. Probably not much more than that. It's not like Jerusalem, a capital. So we don't know how big it was. But babies being killed, how many babies in 1,000 are under 2 years of age? Let's see, 500 couples. Oh, no, maybe a couple hundred couples, because some of them have 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 children. And of the 8 and 10 children, only one's going to be, or maybe 2 under age 2, depending on how busy mama was having babies. But still, if there's only 1,000 people in town and 15 or 20 babies get killed, do you think the whole town is going to know about it? Do you think the whole town is going to suffer for what that evil is that's going on in their community? So he says by taking everybody 2 and under. Now if Jesus is only 4 or 5 months old, or even less, he knows he's got him. Not likely Jesus was 2 years old by that time, although it is a possibility. We assume that Jesus was 2 years old because Herod says he's going to kill all the babies 2 and under. But Jesus could have been very easily a lot younger than that if we follow the timeline. It took a month for the wise men to get there. Joseph and Mary are in a house. After 40 days, which would be about 6 weeks, 7 weeks, they go to Jerusalem, dedicate him. Maybe the wise men came after that, maybe before, we don't know. But then they skedaddle out of town. So Jesus may only have been just a couple of months old. Easy to carry. But anyhow, they were obedient. So everyone in town knows what's going on. And even if it's not your child, if it is your child, or if it is a tyrant who brutally murdered the children in your community, how would you feel? Would you want to have a few things done to that murderer? Maybe you'd be willing to assist in doing to him what he did to your child, or your neighbor's child, or your friend's child. It would probably consider a bit of anger in us. Well, our conclusion is that Matthew is pointing out several prophecies that have been fulfilled by Jesus, even in his birth and infancy. Tom, you got that look on your face.
Yeah, why did they let him get away with this if he was a Jew?
Herod was not a Jew.
He
had some Jewish blood in him through the Maccabean family, but, well, now let's see now. How Jew was he? A little hard to determine, but it doesn't matter. Jew or no Jew, he hated the Jews, and he hated more so, he hated anybody that posed a threat to his throne. And so if this baby's the king of the Jews, I eliminate him, I get to stay on the throne forever? Actually, Herod died shortly after Joseph and Mary escaped to Egypt, and his death was so putrid. I said he was eaten by worms, and the odor from his body was so bad as he was laying on his deathbed that nobody would come into the room. where he was. They didn't want to be around it. That's as far as I need to go with that. We just had dinner.
You know what? He was appointed too by the Romans,
Yes, he was appointed by the
Yeah.
Roman, by Caesar.
by Caesar. Yeah.
Yeah. So the baby is the promised Messiah. Contrary to those who claimed that they're going to be the Messiah, then we found out that they weren't. Jesus is the real thing. Now next week, we're going to hear more about the youth of Jesus. Meanwhile, maybe we want to think about some memories of our own childhood and compare what we learn about Jesus to what we remember about ourselves. So it's time to stop the camera and get ready for some discussion questions.
Camera wasn't running anyway on the